I'm Claire Whitman, 31 years old, and no matter what I built for myself, I was never the daughter my father wanted. At the last family gathering, while everyone else was smiling in pressed suits and polished shoes, he looked me straight in the eye and called my work filthy. In that moment, it felt like the room froze, as though my existence embarrassed him in front of his chosen audience. My mother looked away, my younger sister smirked into her glass, and no one stopped me as I picked up my camera bag and left the house where I had grown up. That was the night I understood what my place in their family truly was. Before I go any further, let me know in the comments where you're listening from, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you've ever had to fight to prove your worth to the people closest to you. I was born into a home where appearances mattered more than anything else. My father Robert built his career in finance, and he prized order, tradition, and results you could measure on paper. My mother Linda believed keeping peace was more important than raising her voice, and she often let silence settle in place of standing up to him. My sister Hannah was the golden child, collecting awards and achievements that my parents displayed proudly on mantels and in holiday letters. I was different. While she practiced piano or debated in front of relatives, I crouched in backyards with a second-hand camera trying to capture light on a bird's wing or the stillness of a fox hiding in the brush. From the beginning, my family's world and mine could not have been farther apart. They admired glass towers, downtown elegant offices, and expensive neighborhoods where neighbors discussed promotions and real estate. I found meaning in mud forests and quiet mornings where only the sound of wind through trees mattered. As a teenager, I sold a photo to a local nonprofit, proud of that small victory, but my father only called it beer money. Even when I earned a scholarship to a respected documentary program, he refused to help with housing, telling me I had chosen dirt and should live in it. At 19, I moved into a shoebox apartment in Queens, balancing 2 jobs while chasing a dream no one in my family believed in. I worked long nights serving coffee and spent early mornings as an unpaid assistant, my hands raw from chemicals and cheap soap. Still, I held on. Each year, I carved out a little more space for myself, teaching workshops, publishing small features, slowly gaining followers online. I learned to visit home with my camera tucked away, my words trimmed down, never mentioning the progress I was making. My mother would whisper that it was best not to provoke my father, and Hannah never missed a chance to laugh at my little hobby. Yet deep down I carried the hope that one day they might see me for what I had become, someone who had built something from nothing, someone who had carved out her own future. That hope is what I carried into the last family meeting. I even brought a framed photograph of a lioness I had captured at sunset, imagining for just a moment that it might open a different kind of conversation. But when the night unfolded and my father spoke with cold finality, I realized what I should have known all along. I was never meant to belong in the family he had shaped. And that is where everything began to unravel. The family meeting had been announced as a celebration, but from the moment I walked through the front door, I knew better. The Whitman house looked just as it always had: polished hedges and spotless windows, but the air carried that practiced formality we all slipped into when my father decided something important needed to be shown. Hannah was already there, perched on a tall chair with a glass of sparkling pink liquid, her nails freshly done and her smile sharpened like a blade. My mother busied herself with the cheese board, adjusting it until it looked untouched, while my father stood at the fireplace, swirling his drink with the air of a man about to deliver a speech. I kept my place on the edge of the couch, the photograph I had brought still wrapped in brown paper across my lap. I had carried it all the way from Vermont, a lioness captured at dusk, its amber eyes lit by fading light. I had hoped it might be the beginning of a new kind of conversation, but the way the room was arranged, I felt more like a guest than a daughter. When everyone was called together, my father's voice boomed through the room. "We're proud to announce that Hannah will be launching her own real estate firm," he declared, his smile wide, his tone rehearsed. He spoke of investment funds, family support, and the importance of legacy words that drew applause from everyone but me. I sat quietly waiting for a moment that never came. Finally, I lifted my hand slightly the way I had when I was a child, hoping to be noticed in class. My father's smile faltered as his eyes fell on me. "Yes, Claire." The question carried weight, the kind that demanded I tread carefully. I asked if the family account would ever support me in the work I had chosen, or if it was meant only for Hannah's ventures. For a heartbeat, the room held its breath, but then his expression hardened. "You," he scoffed. "You've chosen dirt bugs barking dogs. That isn't a business. That's a hobby at best, filthy at worst." The silence that followed pressed into my chest, heavy and unyielding. My mother kept her eyes down. Hannah tilted her glass and smiled as though she'd already won something. My father straightened his shoulders, his voice cutting deeper. "If you want to crawl in the mud for the rest of your life, that's your choice. But don't ever expect this family to finance it." My hand shook slightly as I unwrapped the frame on my lap, revealing the photograph I had carried there with such hope. "This is being featured in National Geographic next month," I said quietly. "I thought you might want it for your office." He didn't even glance at the image. His words came cold and certain. "Take that out of my house. And while you're at it, pack your things. I want you gone tonight." I couldn't move for a moment, staring at him, waiting for someone to interrupt to soften the edges of what had just been said. No one did. My mother's hands stayed fixed on the tray in front of her. Hannah sipped her drink, her smirk never fading. I stood carrying the photograph with me as I walked upstairs to the room that had once been mine. I packed what little remained, the clothes that still hung in the closet, a few worn books, and the camera bag that never left my side. When I came back down, I paused in the entryway. With a steady hand, I set the lioness photo on the table near the door. For one last moment, I thought of what it meant, the strength in those eyes, the power captured in stillness. Then I opened the door and stepped out into the night. The train station was quiet, the kind of quiet that hums like a wound. I carried my bag onto the platform and found a seat by the window. As the train pulled away, the rhythm of steel on steel filled the silence I carried inside me. I pressed my forehead to the glass, knees pulled close, watching the lights fade behind me. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. The pain was too deep for that, a confirmation of something I had known for years, but had never wanted to accept. When I unlocked the door to my small studio in Vermont, I dropped my bag and went straight to the darkroom. The air smelled of vinegar and old paper, the kind of scent that had always felt like safety. I turned on the red light and stood there in the glow, steadying myself. From the drying line, I pulled a photograph I had been avoiding, an owl in flight wings, sharp against blurred trees. I watched it dry, the truth surfacing slowly in shades of black and white. The following morning, I returned to work. My fall workshop had already begun, 6 students in heavy coats waiting in the forest with cameras in hand. We stood knee-deep in dew, laughing, as we tried to catch the morning light through golden leaves, huddling against the cold as we waited for birds that never came. It was simple, it was honest, and for the first time in a long while, it was enough. At night, I poured myself into editing, answering sponsorship emails, and uploading new tutorials. A company even approached me with an offer to design a branded camera line. I never mentioned any of it to my family. I had learned how to keep my peace by staying silent. Weeks passed without a word from them. No phone calls, no apologies, not even a message from my mother. For the first time, the silence didn't feel like punishment. It felt like freedom. One evening I stood at my kitchen window, a glass of wine in my hand, watching the first snowfall coat the ground. The world outside was still the kind of stillness that asks nothing of you. I whispered into the quiet, "This peace, it's worth every penny." I didn't know then that the peace would not last. The days after that meeting stretched into weeks, and the silence between my family and me remained unbroken. No one called to see if I had a place to stay. No one asked if I was all right. I threw myself into my work rising before dawn to meet students in the woods camera gear, strapped over my shoulder mud on my boots. I spent evenings hunched over my desk, editing long past midnight, the glow of the computer replacing the warmth I never found at home. The studio became my anchor, even if the walls were bare and the windows drafty. I returned to Vermont fully, no longer splitting time between New York and the rare holiday visits that always left me raw. I kept my phone on silent during meals, teaching myself not to expect a familiar name on the screen. When I did hear Hannah's voice in my memory, it was never kind. Her jokes about my little hobby, the smirk she wore as if my work were nothing more than a child's pastime. The sting of those moments lingered even as opportunities began to find me. The first time a brand recognized my work, I almost didn't believe it. An email from a pet food company arrived asking if they could use my shelter photos in their upcoming campaign. Then came requests from small grooming businesses and later outdoor gear companies wanting lifestyle shots. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady, and for the first time I could pay my bills with photography alone. Still, I never told my parents. I had learned enough to know that no milestone I reached would matter to them. By the time my channel passed its first major subscriber milestone, I was teaching summer workshops in Vermont that filled within days. People drove in from across the country to learn how to capture wildlife through their lenses. They carried the same spark I once had as a teenager, crouched in the grass with a borrowed camera. We waded through creeks together, waited in silence for birds to break cover, and shared coffee by campfires when the day was done. The laughter of those groups filled a void I had stopped admitting was there. When winter came, I marked the passing of another holiday alone. The snow piled against the studio windows, and I baked a small cake for myself, slicing it carefully as if it were meant for a celebration. I thought of the Thanksgiving table back home, Hannah describing her downtown condo, my father nodding in approval. I had just signed a book contract then with photographs that would be distributed nationwide. Still, I had kept that news to myself, carrying it quietly like a fragile secret. It wasn't only the rejection that weighed on me, but the pattern of being erased. Each time I tried to share a part of myself, the room would fall silent, or someone would redirect the conversation back to Hannah's triumphs. Even when I brought gifts or a simple bottle of wine, I was never more than a shadow at the edge of their circle. I learned to smile through it to stay quiet, but the absence of acknowledgement cut deeper than I wanted to admit. Nights in Vermont became my refuge. I would finish editing and let the darkroom fill with the faint chemical scent of developing film. The images that emerged there told my story better than words ever could. Owls frozen in flight, foxes slipping through snow, deer lifting their heads at the break of dawn. In those frames, I felt a truth that no dismissal could erase. But even as I created a life for myself, I carried the echo of what had been taken from me. I didn't just lose the comfort of a home, I lost the possibility of belonging, the kind of belonging that makes holidays more than obligations. Each quiet evening by the window, I told myself the distance was necessary, that silence was safer than opening the door to more hurt. Still, I couldn't help wondering what it would be like to sit at a table where my name was spoken with pride. One night after uploading a tutorial, I scrolled through messages from students and followers, thanking me for inspiring them. Their words were kind, yet I caught myself thinking how different it felt to hear appreciation from strangers instead of family. I set the phone down, pressing my hands flat against the desk. The silence of the studio pressed around me, broken only by the hum of the heater. It was in that silence that I began to understand the cost of what I had endured. The laughter at my expense, the eyes that turned away the moment my father's voice cut me out of the home I was raised in. They hadn't just wounded me. They had trained me to shrink, to believe my success was something to be hidden, never celebrated. That realization sat heavy, and I knew it would take time to change. Still, I went on teaching, creating, and building what I could. Each photograph sold each student who found their footing, each sponsor who trusted my work. They became stones in a foundation no one else had helped lay. Yet even with those victories, a part of me remained quiet, waiting as if I still longed for the day when a call would come and I would finally be seen. I didn't know then that the call would come not with recognition, but with desperation. And when it did, the silence I had lived with for so long would break in a way I couldn't have predicted. The first snowfall of the season had just settled when I crossed the yard to my studio. The air carried the kind of sharp chill that stung the lungs, but inside the warmth of space heaters and the hum of computers created a different world. I had just filmed a tutorial about winter tracking and was pouring hot cider when my phone lit up across the counter. The name on the screen stopped me in place. It was my father. I let it ring until the final seconds before swiping to answer. Claire. He said no greeting, no softening in his tone. His voice was thinner than usual, strained around the edges. I stayed quiet, waiting. Finally, he continued, "We need your help." I leaned against the counter, the mug warming my hand. "What kind of help?" I asked. His breath carried over the line, steady but heavy, as if he had rehearsed the words. "It's your sister," he said. "She's in trouble." Hannah's name had always carried weight in my family, but this time it came wrapped in desperation. He explained that her new business venture had unraveled. Partners had walked away, lawsuits were piling up, and the bank expected a payment that couldn't be met. The number came next, sharp and exact, $100,000. The silence stretched between us. I could almost hear him shift in his chair. She's going to lose everything, he pressed. And this family's name, our reputation, it's all at risk. I asked slowly, "Why are you telling me this?" His reply came as though he believed it might soften me. "Because you're doing well. I saw the videos, the studio. You've built something for yourself. We're proud." The words fell flat. Just months earlier, he had ordered me to leave his house, called my work worthless, and dismissed everything I had built. Now, with his favored daughter in trouble, suddenly, I was a daughter again. I steadied my voice. "You made it clear I didn't belong. Don't call me now because you need saving. Don't be like this." He snapped, impatience breaking through his controlled tone. "She's your sister." I held the phone closer, my words steady. "And I'm your daughter. But that didn't matter when you humiliated me and told me to leave." "This isn't the time to relive the past," he said quickly. "No," I answered. "It's the time you live with it." There was a pause, then the final push. "Are you really going to let your sister drown just because your feelings were hurt?" I almost smiled at the choice of words. "No," I said. "I'm going to let her drown because she's in a boat you built, and you both were happy to sail without me." His voice broke across my name, but I ended the call. I turned the phone off completely, the silence that followed heavy, yet strangely freeing. For the first time, it wasn't abandonment. It was closure. 3 days later, a knock at the door startled me awake. The clock read just before 7. No deliveries came that early. I pulled the curtain aside and froze. Outside stood my father, my mother, and Hannah. I opened the door halfway, the cold rushing in. "Why are you here?" I asked, keeping my body in the doorway. Hannah stepped forward first. Her voice, usually smooth and confident, was brittle. "Claire, please just hear us out." Her eyes were rimmed red, her face drawn. She clutched her purse like a lifeline. Behind her, my father stood, with his hands clasped stiff and guarded, while my mother's tired eyes filled with worry. "We're desperate," my mother said softly, her voice catching. "Your sister is being sued. The banks are demanding money. If we don't pay soon," I cut her off gently. "I've heard." Hannah wiped at her face. "I messed up okay, I know I did, but I didn't think it would fall apart this fast. I thought I could handle it." The words tumbled out, but I remembered her laughter at my expense, the smirk as my father cast me out. I asked quietly, "Like you thought you could handle mocking me at every holiday?" Her gaze dropped. "I didn't mean—" "But you did?" I said. "Every smirk, every joke, every time you dismissed my work, you meant it. And now you need me." "Enough!" my father interrupted sharply. "This isn't about past offenses. This is about family. You don't abandon blood." I looked directly at him. "You did." My words hung in the cold air. "You abandoned me when you told me to leave your house. Now you stand here because the golden daughter failed." Hannah's voice cracked. "I'm still your sister, Claire, and I'm sorry." For a moment the words wavered in the air, almost softening me. But then I saw the memory of that living room, my father's command, her smile. "I forgave you a long time ago," I said. "But forgiveness doesn't mean rescue." Hannah's lip trembled. "You have the money." "This wouldn't even dent your income, and that's exactly why I'm not giving it to you," I replied. "Because to you I'm not a sister. I'm a checkbook." "No," my mother whispered, her voice breaking. "You're our daughter." "Only when it's convenient," I answered. They stood on the porch, cold air wrapping around us all. I felt tears press at the edges of my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. "I wish things were different," I said, "but they're not. If you're looking for a savior, ask the daughter you chose." I stepped back and closed the door. Their car idled in the driveway for a long moment before rolling away down the snowy road. I didn't collapse, didn't cry. I boiled water, poured tea, and stood at the window as their taillights disappeared. There was no joy in it, no vengeance, just a quiet peace that felt like strength. I believed then that my answer would end it, that they would finally understand no meant no. I had no way of knowing it was only the beginning. For 3 days, I believed the matter was over. I thought the closed door and the silence that followed would finally settle the distance between us. Then, without warning, my inbox filled with subject lines that cut sharper than anything my family had said to my face. "Why did you abandon your sister?" one message asked. Another called me selfish, a monster who cared more about animals than her own blood. I scrolled in disbelief. Dozens of comments began appearing under a photograph I had posted of a fox rescued from a trap. Some accused me of being heartless. Others mocked the very work I had dedicated my life to. My phone buzzed with alerts faster than I could silence them. The words were cruel, but the source became clear when I saw a message from a former workshop student. Attached was a screenshot of a public post Hannah had written. Her words spread across the screen like an accusation I could not outrun. She described me as a sister who had turned her back in the family's darkest moment. She said she had begged, cried, and still I shut the door on her. She admitted mistakes had been made, but cast herself as a woman simply trying to survive, abandoned by the one person who could help. And she ended it with a line that pierced deeper than the rest. "I still love her, but I don't know who she is anymore." The post had already spread across platforms, tagged and shared. Strangers filled the gaps in her story with their own judgment, and the story they believed was not mine. Within days, one of my sponsors emailed to suspend collaboration until reputation concerns were resolved. 2 private clients canceled their winter sessions. Even a brand I had worked with for over a year quietly pulled away. My assistant Mia noticed the sudden shift before I could hide it. She asked gently, "Is everything all right?" I nodded, but the tightness in my chest said otherwise. That night, unable to sleep, I sat across from my attorney Raj Patel at a quiet cafe where snow fell in the glow of streetlights outside. He scrolled through screenshots on his tablet, the evidence stacking higher with each flick of his finger. After half an hour, he looked up. "Claire, this is defamation, clear and measurable. You've lost sponsors, students' income. She hasn't just spoken out of emotion. She's damaged your livelihood." I stirred the coffee in front of me without drinking it. "She's my sister," I whispered. Raj's voice was steady, not unkind. "She was until she made you her target to save herself." His words cut in a way that felt final. I thought of Hannah's voice on the porch, brittle and trembling. I thought of her smirk years earlier when I was dismissed as nothing. Both memories sat side by side, impossible to separate. Raj leaned closer. "You don't have to go to court, but you have every right to. This isn't about family disputes. This is about protecting your work, your name." The quiet of the cafe pressed in on me, broken only by the faint clink of dishes and the wind outside. I inhaled slowly, then met his eyes. "Draft the lawsuit." He didn't smile. He simply nodded. "We'll file on Monday." The days that followed were filled with preparation. Documents were gathered, contracts examined, every loss traced back to Hannah's post. It felt surreal to see my life reduced to evidence charts and screenshots. Yet each page also carried the weight of something undeniable proof that silence had never protected me. When the court date arrived 6 weeks later, the building looked ordinary, fluorescent lights washing over polished floors. The hearing itself held no drama, no grand speeches, just the steady presentation of facts. I sat on one side of the room, Hannah on the other. She wore a navy suit, her hair pulled back neatly, her eyes fixed on the table in front of her. I didn't look at her often. I didn't need to. Raj spoke with calm precision, guiding the judge through every piece of evidence. Screenshots of Hannah's posts appeared on the screen side by side with canceled contracts and financial reports showing the sudden drop in revenue. My YouTube analytics displayed the steep dip that had followed her accusations. Nothing was exaggerated. Nothing was embellished. The truth was more than enough. Her attorney tried to frame it as an emotional plea, a cry for help made in desperation rather than malice. But intent was not louder than impact. The losses were real, the damage measurable, and the court recognized that. When the ruling came, the words were delivered in an even tone. Hannah was ordered to pay damages totaling nearly $150,000 and to issue a formal retraction across every platform where her words had appeared. No vague statements, no excuses. A correction written as clearly as the accusations she had spread. She didn't cry. She didn't look at me. She gathered her papers silently as the judge's gavel marked the end. I sat still, my hands folded, my breath steady. There was no triumph in it, no sense of victory, only a quiet release like the air clearing after a storm. Outside the courthouse, Raj asked if I wanted to prepare a public statement. I shook my head. "No need," I said softly. "The silence will be enough." That evening, I walked alone along a snow-covered trail behind my studio. Each step crunched against the frozen ground, my breath rising in pale clouds. The forest stood still, bare branches stretching overhead, the world stripped down to its simplest form. There was no celebration waiting, no gathering of friends or family. But for the first time, I felt something lighter than bitterness. It wasn't joy. It was something closer to peace. I believed the storm had finally passed, but the letter that arrived the next morning reminded me that some ties never truly dissolve even when you stop holding on. The courthouse steps were still slick with melting snow when I walked away from the ruling, the sound of doors closing behind me echoing in the air. Raj walked beside me, his leather briefcase swinging lightly as though the weight of weeks had lifted. "Do you want me to draft a statement for the press?" he asked quietly. I shook my head. No, let it rest. That evening, I returned to my studio. The forest stretched out behind the windows, silent beneath its blanket of snow. I made tea and sat at my desk, the room dim except for the glow of the desk lamp. For the first time in months, there were no alerts buzzing on my phone, no comments flooding my screens. The quiet felt clean like air after a storm. The next morning, I found a letter waiting in the mailbox. It was addressed in my mother's handwriting, the careful script I had known since childhood. I carried it inside and sat at the kitchen table before opening it. The paper trembled slightly in my hands. Her words filled the page in uneven lines. She wrote that she wished things had gone differently, that she didn't know how to fix what had broken. She said my father was furious that Hannah had moved back home and that the house now carried a silence none of them knew how to live with. She admitted she still wanted to believe there was something left to save in our family, but she also wrote what I had never heard from her before. "I know it's not your job to repair this anymore." I read the letter twice before folding it carefully and sliding it into a drawer. Not out of anger, but because I knew nothing I said could change what had already been set in motion. They had drawn the line when they cast me out, and I had only learned to honor it. For days after I moved through my routine quietly, I led students through snowy fields, their breath rising in clouds as they learned to track footprints in the ice. I edited photos late into the night, watching images of owls and deer appear on the screen like reminders of steadiness. Work had always been my anchor, but in the stillness that followed the trial and the letter, I felt the shift inside me. I thought often of the moment my father had stood in the living room, whiskey in hand, declaring my sister's future bright, while discarding mine as filthy. I remembered Hannah's smirk, my mother's silence, and the way I had carried my photograph out of that house for the last time. Those memories no longer felt like open wounds. They were still sharp, but now they carried edges I could trace without bleeding. The studio grew busier as the weeks passed. Inquiries returned, sponsors reached out again, and students signed up for the spring workshops. The messages from strangers that once called me cruel faded into new words of encouragement, yet I no longer measured peace by whether people clapped for me. I found it in the simple rhythm of my work in the quiet of early mornings and in the knowledge that I no longer needed permission to belong. One evening I stood at the window of my studio with the lights off, watching snow fall across the yard. I thought of my mother's letter, the silence in their house, and the emptiness they were left to face. It no longer pulled me back toward them. Instead, it reminded me of what I had gained the strength to keep my boundaries and the calm that came with them. I didn't know if my family would ever reach for me again. I didn't know if apologies would ever come, or if they would spend the rest of their lives convinced that I had turned away unfairly. But in that moment, I understood that none of it changed the truth I had built for myself. And yet a part of me knew the story was not entirely finished. Some ties linger even when cut, and I would soon learn that the final echoes of their choices were still waiting to reach me. Winter lingered long after the trial ended. Each morning frost clung to the edges of the studio windows, and the trees outside held their branches bare against a pale sky. I buried myself in work, letting each new project and every student session remind me of the stability I had fought for. Sponsors returned one by one, clients rebooked, and the rhythm of my days began to settle again. Then, without warning, another letter arrived. This time it wasn't typed or scrawled quickly. It was carefully written in my mother's familiar hand, the loops of her script pressed firmly into the paper. I read it at my kitchen table, the steam from a mug of tea curling upward as her words spread across the page. She confessed that the house had grown unbearably quiet. She wrote that Robert refused to speak of me, that his anger lingered in every room. Hannah had moved back in defeated and withdrawn, no longer carrying herself with the same sharp confidence. "There is silence at dinner," my mother wrote. "It sits with us like another person at the table. I don't know how to fix this, but I know it is not yours to fix anymore." I folded the letter carefully and placed it in the same drawer as the first one. I didn't respond. For years I had clung to the hope of hearing words like those, yet now that they had arrived, they carried no demand on me. They simply marked the reality of what remained. Life outside of their home kept moving forward. My channel crossed another milestone, though I didn't celebrate with anyone but a slice of pie eaten at my desk. I filmed new tutorials, signed fresh contracts, and continued to fill the workshop rosters. Slowly, the narrative Hannah had spun about me faded from public view. The retraction she had been ordered to post remained online blunt and unadorned, erasing the story she once crafted. Still, in quiet moments, I thought of her sitting in that courtroom, her eyes fixed on the table in front of her, unable to meet mine. I remembered her trembling voice on my porch, her insistence that she was still my sister. Those memories stayed with me sharp and unresolved, even as the world around me steadied. One evening I walked the trail behind my studio, the snow crunching beneath my boots. The woods held a deep hush, broken only by the occasional creak of branches. I paused by the frozen stream, the reflection of the moon fractured across the ice. I thought of the family dinners, where I had once tried to be heard, the living room, where my father cast me out, and the courtroom where the truth had finally spoken louder than his authority. Each memory carried weight, but none bound me anymore. When I returned inside, I poured another cup of tea and stood at the window. My phone buzzed on the counter with a new message alert, but I didn't pick it up right away. I watched the snowfall instead, letting the silence linger. For the first time, it felt like mine to keep. I knew more letters might come, perhaps even another visit, but I no longer braced myself for them. Whatever words arrived, I had learned how to place them in a drawer without letting them shape me. That knowledge was its own kind of justice, the kind no court could grant. And though I believed the hardest part was behind me, I also sensed there was still one step left, the part where I would finally close the door on what remained of the past and choose what kind of peace I would carry forward. Spring arrived slowly in Vermont, the last of the snow receding from the edges of the fields. I found myself outside, more often camera slung across my shoulder, waiting for new life to push through the thaw. The rhythm of the seasons had always steadied me, and now it felt like the final chapter of a long storm. My family remained distant. I didn't hear from Robert again, and I no longer expected to. Linda's letters had stopped too, perhaps because she realized they would not bring me back. And Hannah stayed quiet, bound by the ruling that had forced her to retract what she had written. Whatever words she might have wanted to send, she kept them to herself. In their silence, I discovered something I had chased for years without realizing at peace. Not the fragile kind that depends on someone else's approval, but the kind that comes when you decide your worth no longer hangs on their recognition. I had carried their dismissal for so long that I forgot what it meant to live free of it. I kept teaching, I kept creating. Each student who found joy in their first clear photograph reminded me that my work was more than a career, it was a way of giving. And the life I had built brick by brick was strong enough to stand on its own. Looking back, I see now that the justice I found wasn't only in the courtroom. It was in the decision to protect myself when they demanded more than I could give. It was in closing the door when old wounds tried to reopen. And it was in learning that forgiveness can exist without surrender, that love does not mean endless sacrifice. If you've ever been told you were only valuable when you were needed, I want you to remember this saying, "No does not make you cruel." Protecting your peace is not selfish. Boundaries are not punishment. They are survival. That lesson is what I carry with me each time I step into the woods with my camera. And it's what I leave with you tonight. If this story has touched you, I'd love to know your thoughts. Share them in the comments, and if you haven't yet, subscribe so you can hear more stories like this one. Until then, take care of yourselves and hold on to your peace.